Welcome to Life in the Pit, a podcast about the lives and adventures of instrumentalists within the wonderful world of musical theater. And now, here is your host, David Lane.
And hello, friends. Welcome to episode number 72. It's great to be with you once again. First things first, happy second anniversary to Life in the Pit. It was actually on June 27th, 2020 that we released our first 3 episodes, and the frequencies kind of changed a bit over time. I was posting first weekly and then got a little ambitious and thought that I could do 2 episodes a week for a while, and I did that mainly because I had recorded at one point I had about 9 interviews recorded ahead of release, and I was like, okay, well, so they just don't sit around. We'll go ahead and do twice a week. But then you start to realize just how much work goes into presenting a podcast with a guest and even doing a light bit of editing. And yeah, it soon became apparent that the best I was going to be able to do with my schedule and what I'm able to provide as far as content was every other week. So that is where it's been most of the podcast. Again, this is episode 72, but there's more than 72 episodes. There are some shorter episodes, some bonus episodes that I did not put an episode number on. So all told, there's over 80 episodes that you can check out, talking about mostly life in the theater pit, but sometimes we've gotten outside to talk about topics that are just really more relevant to any type of freelance musician. And going forward, there's going to be some episodes that are outside the box, but also plenty of episodes still coming up for the rest of this year with bona fide pit musicians. One of those bona fide pit musicians is today's guest, Dennis J. Arcano. We're going to be chatting about his career, which includes doing quite a bit of subbing as a drummer and percussionist on Broadway for shows such as Follies, the 25th Annual Putnam County Spelling Bee, Jagged Little Pill, and Mrs. Doubtfire. We're going to talk about what specifically is involved in being a substitute drummer or percussionist, and what's needed for that to come off well. We're also going to be talking about his off-Broadway experience, which turned into becoming the drummer for the national tour of Tick, Tick, Boom. We're going to be talking about his YouTube channel. We're going to be talking about drum programming, and also a lot of the great work that he's doing for local professional theaters in his own region in Connecticut. And so we have quite a bit that we're going to chat today, and this was a very fun conversation. So without further delay, here is my conversation with Dennis J. Arcano. It's my pleasure today to be talking to Dennis. Dennis, how are you today?
I'm great. Nice to be here. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to chat.
Nice. So where is it that you are? Do you live in New York, or do you live somewhere else?
No, I'm in Bethel, Connecticut area,
okay.
Which is just outside of Danbury, Connecticut. It's the largest town near us here. I was born in Stamford, Connecticut, raised in Norwalk, Connecticut. So I've been a Connecticut. I don't know what we call Connecticut people. Connecticut. I don't know. I've been a Connecticut resident my whole entire life, but always been very close to the city. So I'm about an hour and 15 minutes from the city right now. So it makes it very easy to get in there to do work or see shows, and yeah. I've been here my whole life.
Just since you mentioned that's kind of out of order on the questions, but how do you manage getting your drums, to where you're going to go? Do you drive in a car or how does that work?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Anytime I do need to bring my own stuff into the city, I definitely just drive it in myself, because I'm not going to, put it on the train, or there's sometimes too much to, even carry with you on one trip. So you're kind of back and forth. But a lot of times the work that I do in the city, either as a sub or even if I'm playing a show, or a date somewhere, they might even have drums there, which is nice. So sometimes you don't even have to bring your own stuff. Maybe just bring your own cymbals or your own favorite snare drum or something that you want to swap out. But yeah, if I'm taking my stuff in the city, I definitely am driving it myself.
Right. Well, that's I think I talked to it was Mary Ann McSweeney on an earlier podcast.
Oh yeah,
yeah, and I'm just talking about her bass, and I think she does the subway a lot, and or we were just talking about getting her instruments around, and she's just talking about like the car garage prices, just the parking lot, just. Yes, I almost wonder how you make even a profit.
Yeah, you definitely have to weigh that into it. So yeah. I was doing that recently as I was getting into the city in the fall and subbing on a show, and I would calculate. Okay, I'm getting paid this much, but I'm paying this much in tolls. I'm paying this much in parking the car, and if it's a 2-show day, I'm probably going to have lunch and dinner in the city too. And am I breaking even? So I would start to. Bring my lunch and just buy dinner, or I would use this app called Spot Hero, which is helps you find like discounted parking in the city, and you can reserve it ahead of time. So a lot that might have cost me $30 sometimes it only cost me $18. And yeah, it's New York is expensive, and it has those signs of not of slowing down. I think they're actually talking about in the next year adding a I think it's called like a congestion rate or fee or toll for anything below 76th Street, and so it's going to be another toll, another cost to incur. Yeah, it's definitely very expensive.
yeah. I saw that Spot Hero app. I've never used it, but it came up when I was looking up in advance because the first week of the month I was in LA, and I was just like, where am I going to park? And. Actually, I say LA. I was in Anaheim for all but like 2 days, but for those days I was going to go to LA. I was like, where am I going to park? And Spot Hero was recommended, but I didn't go with it. Didn't end up needing it for the places I had to go, but I could see where that might be handy, especially a place like New York where, just good luck finding a spot.
Yes. And I will say for that, I mean, there's multiple apps like that, but I've had really good experiences with them personally, where if I've gotten to the lot and it's full or the GPS took me to the wrong lot, I will call them. They will refund me. They will pay for the next slot that I find. And so shout out to Spot Hero. Let me see if I can get an endorsement.
Nice. So let's just talk a little bit about how I always like to know how did you get into music, and you can abbreviate that as much as you want, but like, maybe how did you get into music, and at what point did you decide you wanted to do this professionally?
Sure. So I don't, a lot of people start very early in their lives, I'm sure, with, piano lessons or music lessons when they're 4 or 5 years old. But so I sometimes think of myself as a bit of a late bloomer musically. I had a friend in middle school who had a drum set in his basement, and we'd go over there and mess around every once in a while. And then 8th grade, I would say, the Christmas of 8th grade, I said to my parents, I want my own drum set. And bless their hearts, they went and bought me one without any experience or any lessons on them. And so I was definitely very, very self-taught at the beginning. So that would probably be my first experience, was just kind of playing on someone else's drums and getting my own. And I'd sit there in the basement with, my favorite 80s hair metal bands and learning songs from Motley Crue and Def Leppard and just kind of playing along and figuring, he's doing this with the hi-hat and there's this beat on the snare drum and this is what the kick drum is doing. So a lot of learning by ear at that time. And then when high school came around, I guess my first real dive into like any like official musical group was being in the high school marching band, which I did for all 4 years of marching band of high school. And then for about 10 years after I graduated, I also went back and instructed my high school's drumline as their drumline instructor. So yeah, lots of just drum set playing, marching band in my early years. And then it was probably sometime in high school where a few of the friends of mine in band were also playing in the pit of the high school musicals. And I think, my freshman and sophomore year, I think it was like, I don't remember, 42nd Street and Leader of the Pack, I think might have been the first two, musicals that I saw with friends, Yeah. So then when junior year came around, my band director said, hey, all the seniors graduated and you're sort of next in line. Do you want to play percussion for Into the Woods? Was our junior year show. And at that time I was like, yeah, how do the drum beats go? And it was like, well, there's no drums in the show. It's all percussion. I was like, okay, what's a xylophone? So, back then I hadn't had much experience. So that was definitely a a big production to cut my teeth on in musical theater. But, I definitely was hooked, just that feeling of playing live in front of people and a story happening on stage and the lights and the costumes and everybody. As we all know, it just becomes very addictive. And yeah, so then my senior year of high school, we did Anything Goes. And the musical director who we used to hire, who came in, was a semi-professional at the time. She asked if I would like to play at a local community theater over that same summer between high school and college. So yeah, just started doing shows that way, and then that was sort of the beginning of it all.
Nice. You brought up Into the Woods, which was actually my last show that I did at a local, a community theater, and I was going to ask, because I like to confirm this with anybody who comes on the show that plays drums. Are you a drummer or are you a percussionist? So how would you call yourself?
I guess I'd call myself both, because I've done both,
Right.
professionally. I prefer playing the drum books to shows, so if you're talking about a show like whatever, Miss Saigon or Chorus Chorus Line, or any of the ones that have a drum book and a percussion book,
Right.
I would prefer to be on the drum book.
Yeah.
But I'm very able and comfortable to play percussion books. I've played, the percussion book to West Side Story many times with all the, crazy mallet stuff. And then there's books like, Spelling Bee or trying to think of any other ones, Follies, where those were one player books only. So you had to play drums and percussion simultaneously. You were kind of playing timpani half the time, then coming back to drum set, then playing mallets. So yeah, I guess my preference is to play drums. I was a drummer first. I love drum set the most.
Yeah.
But I mean, I have no, if someone wants to pay me to play percussion, I'm there.
Nice. Yeah, I think it's good to know your preference, but also, to have some versatility,
Yep.
You never know
Absolutely.
because I'm going to jump ahead a little bit, because we talked a little bit before we were recording, and you said that you've done a lot of things on Broadway as a sub. You haven't done a lot of things as as the principal chair.
The main chair, right.
I started thinking about that. If you play keyboard, I think most shows will give you 2, sometimes up to 4 chances to have a book. I mean, most of the time your piano 1's going to be on early in the process, and rehearsing, with the cast and so forth. But you've got some chances there. If you're a guitarist, a lot of shows give you 2 chances, to have a chair. And if you play even like, a reed instrument, you got 2, 3 chances to have a chair. Same thing with like couple with trumpet, trombone. But there's usually only one drummer on a show, and unless they've separated it and you've got percussion, unless it's something really huge, I guess like the Lion King or something like that. But
Sure.
so I was just thinking, you really have to be comfortable with subbing, and I assume that means also just comfortable with other people's drum sets, right? I mean, you
absolutely. That's funny. Yeah, that's what I actually say is one of the, obviously, learning the music. I mean, there's a bunch of challenges with subbing on a Broadway show, the pressure of it, and you're stepping in on, like I say, you're jumping onto a moving train that's been up and running for however many weeks and months. But that, as a drummer, that's definitely one of the things to always consider. I just recently heard a story of a young drummer who's up and coming, trying to get into the city, and was going to sub on a show, and was like, I'm just practicing on my drum set. I mean, I know the drum set in the theater is like a 4-piece, but I'm just using my 3-piece to learn it. And I'm like, no, when I'm subbing a show, I come in here in my studio, and the first thing I do when I go to check out the drummers, is I come with my tape measure, and I measure how high is their snare drum, and what's the angle of their floor tom, and what's the height of it. And then I recreate that here, because, especially like I'm 6 feet tall, and some drummers are a little shorter than me, some are a little taller than me. And, I don't want to go in and mess. A lot of drummers in the city don't want you, like, you're just going to sit down and play. You're not going to come in and adjust their things and whatever, because they want to come back the next night and just sit right back down and do their job. So I always try to go in as a respectful sub and say, listen, I'm just going to sit down and play your show. Mm-hmm. But absolutely, that's definitely one of the biggest considerations, or one of the biggest challenges when learning to sub a show as a drummer on Broadway, is that you've got to play on a kit that you're not comfortable with the setup. You might not be comfortable with the feel. Like, wow, this person's snare drum is a lot tighter than my snare drum, and the rebound is a little bit different. And those are the things you have to practice. So there's also, you go in before you're going to have your first sub date, and you find a few days to go in and practice on that person's drum set with your headphones on, the recording of the show you're playing along to, so that you can not feel like you're coming in that first time on a foreign setup. But yeah, that's definitely one of the more challenging parts of being a Broadway sub, for sure.
Right. Nice.
On drums. Yeah.
How would you, if you were to like just create a roadmap from, going from your kind of college days to being, just to make it to Broadway, like what are some key steps along the way to getting that first Broadway gig?
It's like from my experience personally, or like as a recommendation?
No. From your experience, like
sure.
What are some things? Some big key steps along the way.
Absolutely. Well, I really lucked out, I have to say. My freshman year of college, I was at the Western Connecticut State University of Connecticut. Western Connecticut State University in Danbury, Connecticut is what I meant to say. And we had a regional theater down the road called the Candlewood Playhouse in New Fairfield, Connecticut. And they were looking for a drummer or a percussionist, and they happened to call my percussion teacher, David Smith, at WestCon. And I had played the shows at the high school or at the college as well too, because I was, like I said, I was kind of like all in on playing musical theater. And he recommended me, and lo and behold, I ended up all 4 years of college. I had the greatest summer job ever. I would play 4 productions with equity actors at a professional theater. And in those 4 years, I met 2 very influential people for me getting to the Broadway scene. Stephen Oremus, who is a music director and music supervisor of almost everything you've ever seen on Broadway, Wicked, Avenue Q, 9 to 5, everything. And Simon Matthews, who is a sound designer of pretty much everything you've ever heard, or sound engineer on Broadway as well too. And they, when they started working in the city, and drummers would ask, for names, my name came up a couple of times, and it panned out. The first show I subbed on Broadway was the 2001 revival of Follies, Stephen Sondheim Follies. And that was through my friend Simon Matthews, the sound engineer. He was mixing that show. And the drummer on that show, Billy Miller, said, I'm looking for someone else, and just happened to, pan out from there. So it's definitely, I always tell every musician who's really interested in like going that far in theater is to, is like saying like wanting to get to Broadway, is to just do every theater gig you possibly can, because you'll never know. I mean, we were even just talking, before we recorded, you just never know where someone along the line is going to be connected to a Broadway show and have you in their mind as someone that they can trust and do the job well and give you the call, So that was sort of my path. It just kind of went, I was very lucky that I happened to meet people on that first, gig. That was really my first professional gig, those 4 years. I was like 19 years old, and just happened to meet the right people at the right time.
Everyone has a different story of how they, whether it's pit musician or anything, how they reach a certain level of success. But I find that actually it's always the same story, kind of template, and that is develop your skill. And then take every opportunity, and then have a little luck.
Yes, be in the right place at the right time. Yeah.
It just seems like that is always the case. And there are plenty of people that hit on 2 out of 3, and that's why you don't know them. It's like they haven't made it. But if you can make all 3 happen, and it seems to me like if you do enough of the first 2, the third is just a matter of law of averages. Some people happen soon, some people happens later, but it's just always helpful to just kind of put each story into that template. It always works out. I was just looking at some of the shows you did. I was particularly interested in Tick, Tick, Boom. I'd never heard of that show till I music directed that in 2015 for community theater. And, I call it the little show that could. It was like they didn't even know if it was going to sell any tickets in this area. It didn't know if like Jonathan Larson's name was going to be enough to get that going. But word of mouth is we actually had to add a weekend, to accommodate people who want to see that. And it was, it's one of those, I always love shows where the band outnumbers the cast, because I think So four, I think it was a 4-piece.
4 in the band, 3 in the cast. Yeah. Yep.
So, yeah, and of course, I thought, in my opinion, Netflix did a great job, on adaptation. It had a bit of an all that jazz vibe to it, in terms of just the way it was edited and so forth. But so, what was it like? How'd you get that gig? And, just what are some memories of playing that show?
Yeah, of all the things I've done in my career, that was the most meaningful show that I ever got to play in. And I look back on that, 2 years on and off with the off-Broadway and the touring production fondly as just my favorite gig ever, because, one of the reasons why I got into really pursuing theater was, Rent was a huge influence on me. When I saw Rent, I was just like, I'm in. This is what I want to do. I just everything about it, the story, the Jonathan Larson, just the music, I was a Rent head for sure. I slept out on 41st Street on my 21st birthday to get the, first row seats that they were doing back then, the student rush tickets. And so when I heard, I think it was 2001, when I heard that they were going to be now. So for people who don't know Tick, Tick, Boom, it was actually a show that Jonathan himself, when he was alive, had performed as a one-man show before he wrote Rent. Right. So he was a, up and coming, struggling composer in the city. He wanted to do musical theater, had a couple of things here and there. And he wrote this semi-autobiographical musical about himself, trying to write a musical while also freaking out about turning 30 in the early 90s. And so there's a lot about, the struggling artist in the show. But after he died and all the success of Rent, they had the idea, like, let's bring this back and let's see if we can make a little off-Broadway run of it. So when I saw that on Playbill.com and saw that one of my friends, Matt Beck, was going to be the guitarist on the show, and Stephen Aremus, who I just mentioned before, was the original conductor or vocal arranger of the production, I hit both of them up and said, hey, listen, your drummer, Clayton Craddock, tell him what a huge fan I am of Jonathan Larson. Tell him that you've worked with me and that I'm good player, that I could do the job, and please get me in there as a sub. And this was Clayton Craddock's first job as a drummer on an off-Broadway show. He had not done musical theater himself before, so I don't think he knew a lot of people in the area. So he thankfully gave me a call, and for the off-Broadway run, I was one of his subs on the show. So I was in there a bunch of times. Actually, talk about thinking about memories, think about my first sub date on the show was September 15th, 2001. And the last time I was supposed to sit in and watch the show before my sub date was September 11th, 2001, which obviously did not happen for many reasons. And so that show on the 15th that I subbed was the first show when Broadway and off-Broadway shows reopened after 9/11. So my wife and my good friend at the time were my guests to see the show. And, it was a very solemn, vibe in the city. And but there was just something so, magical about, we were all going to, try to be resilient and do our thing. And that's like one of my, just that whole experience of performing a show, being a part of that history of Broadway reopening after this closing. That was amazing. So I subbed on and off for the off-Broadway run. It only ran about 6 months or so, 6, 7, 8 months. I'm not sure. And then in 2002, I got a call from Stephen Aremus again saying, hey, you want to maybe go out on the national tour of Tick, Tick, Boom? I know how much you love the show. And I was like, sure. And at the time, I should mention that I'm also currently, and have been for the past 24 years, a public school teacher here in Bethel, Connecticut. So it was kind of like, well, I'd love to do it, but I got to figure out how I can take 6 months off from school. And thankfully, my administrators were like, you can do a leave of absence. This is a once in a lifetime opportunity. And then what was great is that Stephen Aremus said that he needed to have someone in the band. Like you had mentioned, there's only 4 people in the band. There needed to be someone else who could also play piano as like an assistant musical director, so that when we had understudy rehearsals on Thursday, the actual MD could be in the house and giving notes. And, and so he had me come to his apartment because I'm a multi-instrumentalist as well. I play piano, guitar, bass. I do a lot of recording. And I came in and played for him. He was like, all right, cool. So you're going to be drummer every night and also be assistant MD and do, the rehearsals, understudy rehearsals, which was great. Then in 2003, we went out on the road for 6 months. And it was very cool. My wife actually ended up getting a job on the tour as the merchandise, person. So we actually got to, tour together it was like a paid vacation for 6 months, just
Nice.
traveling the country and playing one of my favorite scores ever, about my favorite theater composer ever. So yeah, I definitely, that always tops the list of my favorite productions or favorite experiences in musical theater. Nice.
Well, you brought up a good point that is concerning. A lot of times when I talk to musicians on tours, they might have a girlfriend or a fiance, but they're seldom married, and they seldom have a full-time job, where they are. So for a lot of musicians like yourself, that question of how am I going to do this when the opportunity strikes? So it's great that you were able to work out those obstacles and able to have that experience.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that's what I definitely say. It was a once in a lifetime experience. Nothing. I don't expect to ever have that opportunity to tour again, nor would I, probably be able to make it work, 25 years later, just as life happens. But it was just a perfect little moment in time that, we both got to go out together and work on a show. And yeah, it was great.
Right. I noted some Broadway shows that you've sat in on before: Follies, 25th Annual Putnam County Spelling Bee, Jagged Little Pill, Mrs. Doubtfire. Would I be correct that that's kind of chronological order?
Yep.
I think just kind of for the sake of time, I'm kind of start with the second one here. So the 25th Annual Putnam County Spelling Bee. So
sure.
Yeah, just kind of a shout out because we discovered before we recorded, we have a common person because you were subbed for the original production, and Lisa Howard was in the original production, and she's our lead for the Collins Boy, the show that I've talked about on here before, and that I'm the arranger for, and that's an interesting show. I've heard, especially from the keyboard perspective. I've talked to someone who programs keyboards and sells those programs, and he said that was probably his biggest selling program, or one of them. I think Mamma Mia might be a little bit more frequent of a sell, but it's just it's a complicated program, very difficult to just do it yourself. So what is the drum book like for that show?
Sure. So the drum book for that show is the whole orchestration for that show is kind of unique. If I remember correctly, and I may be wrong here, but I feel like I remember the orchestration being done to sound like it was sort of an incomplete middle school band. Like, what would a middle school band just kind of have? Because the whole show takes place in a school gym at a spelling bee, and so the accompaniment wanted to kind of have. So you have the keyboard player, the piano player. There's like a reed book. There's a cello, and then there's a percussion. So there's no bass. There's no guitar. There's none of the things you would expect to see or expect to hear in a Broadway show. So that may or may not be correct, but from the percussion sense, they were definitely trying to cover it. There was one player who played drums and percussion. So we had, a station where the drum set was set up, and it was your standard 5-piece drum set with, some cymbals, some toys, wood blocks, cowbells. And then you had timpani to the left of the hi-hat over here that you played very frequently with from the drum set. You'd finish playing a drum phrase with the right hand and then go to the left hand on the timpani. And then you used to have to stand up and take a few steps to sort of the mallet percussion station where they had a vibraphone, xylophone, a set of orchestra bells, a couple more cymbals and wood blocks and toys there. And then there's also, for the I Love You song, where where Olive is talking about her mother, who Lisa Howard plays in that scene. Right. She goes out of her role and is in India in doing something. I can't remember exactly what the storyline was, but so there's like an Indian dumbek drum or something that we played as well. It's a little bit of world percussion in there. So yeah, it's definitely a really fun book to play. And then I was fortunate enough a couple of years. The reason why I mentioned Kevin Rowland, keyboard programmer, I currently work as a contractor, keyboard programmer and drummer for a regional theater here in Ridgefield, Connecticut, called a Contemporary Theater of Connecticut, ACT. And we did Spelling Bee back in 2019. And it was just so cool to like play the show again, you know, after having played on that original Broadway production. And we rented his programming. And I remember, because when I looked at the book as a programmer, I was like, there's no way I can get these sounds to be, you know, we need to find someone who's got access to the original sounds and has sampled them from the Kurzweil keyboards, whatever it was that they used. So yeah, it's definitely a very unique sounding orchestration. And yeah, I'm always surprised. I mean, it's a great show. It's hilariously funny. Mm-hmm. It's improvised, you know, and it's just, it's great to see that it's still, you know, however many 15 years later now, still just has a life outside of that original production. It's right. Yeah, it's a great show.
You know, we've talked about keyboard programming quite a bit, you know, on this podcast, but we've never really talked about drum programming. What is that? And I know you've said that you do that, so.
Yeah, I do a little bit of both. Yeah, I mean, they're sort of similar, you know, whereas a keyboard programmer's job is to create and organize and put together, you know, keyboard sounds for a keyboard player to be able to just patch through one sound, you know, at a time. Same thing for drum programming. You know, I just literally on Sunday finished a production of Rent at ACT, and that has a good amount of drum programming in it. So for that show, I use a device called the Roland SPD-SX, which is just a drum pad, sample pad, and it means going through my libraries of sound and finding exactly the right shaker sound or a sample of an electronic snare drum or whatever it might be, and doing any kind of processing. Maybe that means adding a little reverb or EQing it or chopping the file or doing whatever I might need to do from a digital sense with whatever recording software I might have, Pro Tools, Logic. And then for that situation, then taking the samples, putting them onto patches. I had the first patch was just the bongos that are used when the first time we hear the Santa Fe theme in that show, and then I would patch to Rent number 2 patch, and then I would have all the electronic percussion sounds for Light My Candle, which has this kind of looping groove on it there. Mm-hmm. And then I'd patch through to patch 3, which had I also did the background tracks for Today for You and Contact, so I was also the person triggering those. So not really a drum programming, but just showing that I had other things that I also that I triggered for the production from that. So yeah, it's drum programming is very similar to keyboard programming. Anything that has to do with electronic drum sounds and what devices you're going to be using to trigger those sounds. You could use them on a standalone thing, like I mentioned, the Roland, or I could connect that MIDI device to a main stage rig, for example. I'm sure you've talked about main stage with people before on the show, and there's a lot of drummers that use main stage. Yeah, so it's just another way of adding electronic sounds to a show via the drummer instead of the keyboard player.
Yeah. I almost picture electronics kind of taking a hold of everywhere in the pit. So obviously keyboards for a long time, but I know guitars can be used as controllers. Obviously, you're saying drums can be used as controllers, and one of the things that they had at NAMM, earlier this month was reed instruments that are digital. So it's like you can have that one reed instrument. You can obviously you can make it sound like something else. Which I'm not sure if that would be really good if you're trying to replace an actual reed instrument, because the technology is still not quite there yet as far as reproducing a good, real sound. But it might be helpful if you're budget conscious and you can't hire someone, who can do all the doubling. But also if you want some synthetic, interesting sounds, so that you can't get from a reed instrument. So.
Yeah, that's right. We just my wife is a flutist, and I got her one of them last year for Christmas, and we just not to like you said, it'd be interesting to see how they use it in musical theater, but it was cool for her as someone who has the ability to play a reed instrument, and she knows notation and fingerings for those instruments. Like you said, then it was kind of cool to say, here, play like a synth patch, but instead of playing it on the keyboard, which she might not be as proficient to do, she can do it here as she would on a flute. And then it come out like, as a lead sawtooth patch or something like that. So that I think is kind of cool, giving someone the ability to play any sound they want, but on the instrument that they're most comfortable with. But I think it'd be kind of weird to see if people try to use it to, use it as like, oh, you're playing a flute, clarinet, sax, book, and you don't really play sax or clarinet, so now you can just put the patches in. Yeah, it's interesting. We'll have to see where that goes.
Nice. What would you say is the wildest setup you've ever had to play as far as your instruments for a show?
I think I would probably have to say any version of the 2-player book to West Side Story. For me, that's always been. I've played both the drum book and the percussion book, and really, when you do it right, it can be done with 2 players, and both players have to sort of cover things that you might think the other might play. Like, for example, the opening of the song, or the opening of the prologue, where we have ba-dum, bump, and then the drums play da-doom, 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 da-doom. Now, those are written to be on concert toms that a percussionist would play, not the drum set, But usually when that show, space, money, whatever it might be, a lot of times that would be played by the drum set player, because why add 4 more concert toms to the percussion setup when he's got a snare drum and 4 toms already? So that person plays it, and vice versa. Like, there's times where there's a xylophone part that's not really able to be gotten to by the percussionist because they have to play, timpani or cymbal roll. So then the drummer might have a little pit xylo in their setup as well to be able to catch just a couple of xylo parts here and there. So yeah, I would say for me that's been the most complicated. Most drum books that I've played, there were definitely. I just saw a picture of Shannon Ford, who is the drummer for Beetlejuice right now. I saw a picture of his drum setup. There's a drum book and a percussion book on that show, and his drum setup was just awesome. There was just stuff everywhere, electronics and cymbals and drum. Or another drummer friend of mine, Russ Nyberg. He was the touring drummer for the last tour of Miss Saigon that closed, before the pandemic, and that was originally a 2-player book, but they're touring with it as 1 player. So I look at his setup and I get agita because I'm like, I just would not want to have to think about setting all of that up or having to play everything that's in that setup. So there's definitely some really wild setups out there. But I would say for me personally, it's definitely either of the books for West Side Story. There's just so many cool sounds and cool things to have around there.
Nice. Not related to Broadway, but kind of related to drum setups. I bought myself a book earlier this month that was a new release, and I haven't gotten a chance to actually get into it, but it's the complete scores of 40 songs from the band Rush. And it's got Neil Peart. It's got everything transcribed, and from what I've been told, it's very accurate. So, there's some things, some things he's done, especially in the late 70s, early 80s, that it'd be very interesting to just see that transcribed and what kind of setup that is. So yeah, I have a Rush out, like I forget which album it is, but there's like one album that I have the transcriptions of all 3 of their parts, like, it's the guitar, bass, and all the drum stuff. And it's the same thing, very accurate. The people out there who have that ability to go in there and like transcribe exactly every note he's playing on whatever rototom or cymbal bell or, every very specific thing. It is definitely very cool to see that. And so, it's also very humbling when you go, oh, it's notated. I can figure this out. No, I can play like him. No, you can't. So it's, well, at least for me, there might be some people who can, but yeah, it's very cool that there's people who do that stuff. Nice. You've done a lot of things, a lot of interesting projects besides theater. One I thought would be neat to talk about is you played. If I read this right, you played for the Sherelles for their initiation into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. That's Cleveland.
Oh,
right?
No, I didn't play for. No, I just at the time they were going by Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inductees, the Sherelles. They had already been inducted, so it was just kind of that would have been cool.
Okay.
No, it was the Candlewood Playhouse, which I had mentioned, where I had been playing in my college years, the Equity Theater in New Fairfield, Connecticut. They would also do every once in a while. They would do a New Year's Eve thing. So one year they just did a New Year's Rockin' Eve with the Sherelles, and so they had their own guitarist, music director. His name has slipped my mind because this was back 1997 at this point. That they traveled with, and then the venue would hire I think it was a drummer, a pianist, a bass player, and maybe a horn player of some sort. So I got hired to play on that New Year's Eve concert with them. But it was still kind of cool, to work with. And, my parents and that was like from their age of pop music. And so they loved knowing that I got to play with a group from their era. You know, when I tell them a lot about the stuff that I do in the musical theater, they're like, who's Lin-Manuel Miranda, you know, whatever. But when it was like the Sherelles, they were like, oh, that's awesome. So yeah, I did not get to play on their induction ceremony, but I got to play with them after they had been inducted. So they had that little caveat to their title there.
Well, that's still cool. I'm sorry I made it sound much cooler.
No, yeah, you made it sound way better than it was.
You know, I haven't had a chance to check out more than a few videos, but you've got a pretty impressive YouTube channel. It's like you've done caught a lot of things from your time in the pit, and you know, just some other videos on there. What are some fun videos that, like, if someone was going to go check it out, what would be like some good first videos to check out? Yeah. So I've got a bunch of them. I've got everything from me playing the most recent Jagged Little Pill on Broadway. I've got a couple of clips of me playing that. My Tick Tick Boom national tour is up there on as well. There's a couple. Every show I've played, I think I'm up to 14 productions now from ACT that I've done. They're all up there too. But I think my favorite one that's on that musical theater playlist of mine is when the pandemic hit in March of 2020. I had just gotten into subbing on Jagged Little Pill. I'd probably been in about 4 times. And the pandemic hit, and of course all of us were like, when are we going to have especially as a sub. My mentality was like, well, if this show ever does open again, if any of these shows ever open again, I'm sure as long as we keep going, it's been 6 months, it's been 12 months, it's been 18. I felt like, that meant the main guys were probably not going to be taking off much time, and the subs would not, be getting in there anymore. So one of my favorite videos that I have up there is I decided to play my favorite song from the show, which was a very little known song by Alanis Morissette called Unprodigal Daughter. And I just played the whole thing. Like I played the 2 guitar parts, the bass part, the drum part, the keyboard part, sang the background harmonies, and sang the lead part, which is usually sang by a female. And I had to try to belt out some high Ds, which was fun. So that was my favorite little one that I put on there. So it's not really of me in the pit. It was me in the studio, but it was just me kind of missing my current, subbing gig and just playing one of my favorite songs from it. Then fast forward, when the shows did reopen back this past October, I was lucky enough to actually go in and play some of the rehearsals for the reopening of the show, which was super cool because the drummer had some conflict. So I got to be a part of like another historic reopening of Broadway back in the fall with that show. But yeah. So my YouTube page has definitely has been. I have a playlist just for as many. I think that's another part of the Rent influence on me, where Mark was the documentary filmmaker even before the age of YouTube and everybody with a phone, a camera on their phone. I was always documenting my playing and stuff. So it's kind of cool to put some of those things from back in the day up there as well, too, in addition to some current things. But yeah, I think those are some of my favorite ones. Nice. What are your current projects, both in theater and outside of theater? Sure. So, like I said, I'm also a public school teacher going into my 25th year. I'm on summer break now, but I'll be starting my 25th year in August, September. Oh, but sorry, what do you teach? I'm a general music teacher. Okay. Yeah, general music teacher, K through 3, working with all the little ones there. And yeah, it's super. A lot of people always say like, why not a band director or a court, and I'm like, I don't know. There's just something about working in general music, which I really like, because I guess it's maybe just my ADHD where I'm like, I don't want to focus on just one aspect of music. It's kind of fun to be able to do a little bit of everything. It doesn't matter what the age group is. It's just kind of fun that I do a little bit of performing, a little bit of singing, a little bit of composition. We do digital music. We do, so I kind of like having that ability to do a bunch of different things with them. Yeah. So doing that. And then, as I mentioned, I'm also a contractor, programmer, drummer for a regional theater, ACT. We're starting up our 5th season in the fall. We're doing Guys and Dolls, Rock of Ages, and Secret Garden. So I'll be contracting, programming, and playing any, all or some. I haven't decided what my playing time will be, but I'll definitely be programming and contracting all of those. And then I do have a couple of Broadway shows, subbing opportunities coming up. I never mention what they are because I don't want to jinx myself until I've gotten through the approval process. So maybe I'll follow up with your podcast if they happen. Oh, sure. Yeah. And by the way, just for the record, you've mentioned ACT a few times. What does that stand for?
a contemporary theater of Connecticut, ACT. Yeah.
And is that a like a regional professional or okay?
Yep, we're a regional equity theater in Ridgefield, Connecticut. It was opened in 2018. Ridgefield, Connecticut is oddly this weird little hub of. It's an hour outside the city, and a lot of people who work on Broadway live in that area. So these three performers, musicians, actors, producers, Dan Levine, Brian Perry, and Katie Diamond opened their own theater. And I happened to have seen some of the stuff they had done before they opened the theater, and sort of reached out to them myself and said, hey, listen, if you need a drummer, a contractor, a programmer, I'm around. And Brian, who was the music supervisor, he's also the conductor of Jagged Little Pill, which is my connection to that show. So through ACT, it's all connected. It's all who you know. He said, well, yeah, come and work for us. And we all kind of hit it off, and I've been doing their shows for the past 5 years. It's been, and it's like 20 minutes from my house. So it's great. It led me back to doing some Broadway stuff as well too.
I really love hearing things like that. I think in a way New York is always going to be the crown jewel of American musical theater, and LA is going to be the crown jewel of filmmaking. But the more that all of these things can happen elsewhere at a high level in the country, I just think that's great. Yeah, I would love for someday to just be, if you live in any medium to large city, you've got theater that's not just touring but produced.
Sure. Yeah, we're like I said, we're very besides the actual performers and professionals live in the area, we also have people like Stephen Schwartz, who lives in Ridgefield, got involved with our theater. And, we did the presenting Stephen Schwartz series for the first 3 seasons. We did Working, we did Godspell, and we did, Snapshots was actually the coolest one. So I don't know if many people know about this show, Snapshots. It was done originally as a little regional production, never had a Broadway or an off-Broadway production, but it's basically a review musical of songs from all of his shows. Wicked, Pippin, they're all in there, built around a story. And we were set to do a staging of it in January of 2021. But obviously with the pandemic, that didn't happen. So our director had this amazing idea to do a filmed movie version of it. So in isolation, the band came in, and recorded the music first to click tracks and whatever. The cast came in isolation and did the vocals. Then they went on location and filmed to the tracks afterwards. And we put that out. And now, and just going off what you said, now that movie has been licensed to Broadway HD. So if anybody wants to see our production, they can see it on Broadway HD. It's called Snapshots, a musical scrapbook, Stephen Schwartz from ACT. And we released a cast album of it, which got nominated for a Grammy, which was incredible for this little, 4-year-old theater in Ridgefield, Connecticut. But that's to your point, is that, it's yes, of course, New York is always going to be the mecca of musical theater, and Broadway is always the pinnacle of what, you're going for. But, good theater and good art can be done anywhere if it's the right people at the right time doing their best work and putting their blood, sweat, and tears into it. And it's been very rewarding to have that just 20 minutes from my house and sort of be at the next level where I'm not just the drummer, I'm also involved with the production team and being able to go back and forth, and not have to have all of the rigmarole and the stress of going into the city. Not that I still love it. I'm still going to do it for as long as I have the energy to do it, and as long as people actually want me to come and do it. But yeah, I agree. It's definitely good to know that you can work in quality theater outside of that area as well too.
Nice. So last question is I'll
Sure.
include the YouTube and also include the the ACT website in the show
Sure.
notes. Aside from that, is there anywhere else that you recommend for people to check what you're doing?
Mainly my YouTube channel, Dennis J. Arcano, Arcano, like you said. I'm on Facebook, but not very often. I'll usually post when I have a gig. So I just, post some drum setups from Rent and things like that. But I'm not often interactive on social media. No, I don't. I really have any other. No Instagram, no TikToks, none of that stuff that the kids are doing these days for me. But
almost envy you.
Yeah. It's mostly it's just time, and also we all get kind of, I don't know, it can get a little depressing and stressful in those venues sometimes too. So I just have to kind of go, yep, it's a choice. I'm not gonna look.
Right.
So, but my YouTube channel is pretty much the best place to just check out, anything that I've done from Broadway to regional to touring. It's all there.
Great. Well, I want to thank you for taking time to talk with me today, and best wishes on your upcoming projects.
Thanks so much, man. It was great to chat with you too, David.
And that wraps up episode 72. Once again, we're celebrating 2 years on Life in the Pit, and it just occurred to me I didn't even say this in the introduction, but thank you so much for being listeners. I know a lot of you listening have listened since episode number 1, and that means a lot that you're still listening. And if this is your first episode, welcome. Hope that you'll share this and you'll check out some of the other episodes that we've done. I really am proud that we've had plenty of Broadway guests now. We've stayed true to talking to people all over the country, and we've had a couple of international guests as well. So I'm really proud to just be part of that and keep that going. As far as I know, this is still the only podcast that focuses on instrumental musicians who play for theater. There may be one, there may be others out there, but I'm just, at least when I started and last time I've checked, this has been one of the very few. So I'm very happy to give voice to these excellent musicians who, you don't really watch when you go to the theater because you're there to see the actors on stage. And it's just great to be part of that. Before I forget, just wanted to remind you, please, if you are a private teacher of any subject, whether that be yoga, martial arts, or, of course, music, definitely you should consider looking into FONS and that platform. You can find out all about it and even start a 14-day free trial, and you can use the link in my show notes to find out more. I hope to be back with you in a couple of weeks. I'm not too sure when the next episode will be, but this is when I tell you. As a reminder, if you want to follow what's coming up next, be sure to follow us on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook at Life in the Pit Pod. You can follow me on Instagram at David Lane Music, or on Twitter or Facebook at David M. Lane Music. As always, a special thanks to Mark Perollo for his cover art and to Bill Cisna for providing the introduction to this podcast. The theme music is composed and performed by David Lane. You can find out more about this podcast, leave feedback, or even leave a donation at lifeinthepitpod.com. Please rate and review on the Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening. And once again, please share with your friends. Thank you for listening.